Okay, so JD, I wanted to respond to you directly on what you posted about, on this dialogue about, you know, humans and fallen angels and all that stuff, right? So Vikings came out of Africa too. I see your logic, but I don't like it. This is a joke, I know. I prefer their descendants from fallen angel when they mix with humans. We're all the gods who made black folks, and Africa's made us from them. We share genetic code with the gods. They share genetic code with fallen angels. Probably absolutely rubbish, and you're probably right. But mine makes a better YouTube algorithm. And you're 100% right on a lot of things, including that it makes better YouTube algorithm. So essentially, what I'm saying is, out of Africa occurred, then, right, fallen angels, that whole thing manifests. That's why they don't necessarily, mess each other up. When you're saying this and I'm saying this, these things could both have existed in the same, relatively the same timeline. This happens, then that happens. And here's the thing, though, which I question about that. And I'm just going to tell you a really honest story. So years back when I started this channel, like I did a piece specifically on the Grigori. And I'll tell you why I'm mentioning the Grigori, because I think that's the name. I don't know if you use that. I don't think you did. But I would use the term Grigori. Grigori was a term for their relationship with the fallen angels, right? So I done this piece, and I talk about how they, mated with human women and what the offspring were, right? And that video did really well. This is early when I started my channel. And immediately after that, I got banned. Like, my channel was totally shut down. I couldn't post for like 3 months. And I've never had anything like that happen before that or since that, because that's not really the nature of my channel. Like, I don't, steal content. I don't really talk about controversial stuff ordinarily, right? So I was kind of like really miffed about it. And honestly, my channel was growing back then at a rate that it's never gotten to yet. So I've always felt like talking about the Grigori, like, triggered. Because I was getting so much, like, comments about that. Like, I had to take that video down. Like, it was, and I went back to it because I tried to edit it out because I'm like, man, am I saying something in here that's off the hook? Like, I was really, really looking at my images, everything, and it didn't matter, right? So I chalked that one up, and I just kind of went back to kind of rebuilding the channel. But I did talk about Grigori, and there's a number of interesting things that come out of the conversation with the Grigori, because what I'm saying about how humans went around the world, populated Earth, doesn't dispel what you're saying, right? Your comments about the fallen angels, that does not dispel what I said either. They're not in competition with each other. Those two comments work together, right? So what I get from the story of the fallen angels is a couple of things, right? First, the fallen angels became demons, right? That the stories that we hear about demons are mostly stories about fallen angels. And there's a list of like, I think it's like 100. I think it's like 140 fallen angels. I think that's the number. 140 fallen angels who come to Earth. And they become demons, and there are various stories. I've been working my way through the list of fallen angels, so I've got quite a few videos. I think I have an old playlist about fallen angels. So you can kind of read up, like, these are fallen angels. This is how they manifested. This is where we found them. Like binding, how you bind them and things like that. So I kind of talked a little bit about that. And I do believe that these fallen angels were like, yeah, we're here, we're going to mate with humans, and they had offspring. And that's where the terminology gets a little bit confusing, because we hear the terms Grigori, we hear the term Watchers, which would account for the fallen angels, we hear the term Nephilim. So I think there's a little bit, like, we're trying to figure out what the succession is. Because early on, the mention of Grigori, in that sense, kind of diminishes. Like, there's not a lot of stories out there about the Grigori. You can find stuff on YouTube, but there's not necessarily a lot of books that are out there about the Grigori, and we don't hear about the Grigori in like anything. Like, there's no myths told about the Grigori, nothing. And that's rare, because we always hear myths about stuff, or we think we hear all the myths, right? We never hear anything about the Grigori. So, my idea was, okay, the Grigori should be accounting for half human, half divine creatures. So I automatically thought about, well, where do we hear stories about divine, half divine, semi-divine, demigods is what we're looking at. So I started looking at stories like, Gilgamesh, obviously, who was, I think, 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. Hercules, who was, supposedly half human, half the son of Zeus, so half God. and Zeus's whole host of like offspring that he had with human women. This is a big component. So because of that, I've always looked at where do we find these stories about demigods, because this would tell us more about Grigori Nephilim. I also looked at, when we're talking Vikings, we're specifically talking about Norse belief systems and what they believe. So I looked at Norse belief systems and did they have concepts of Grigori, or excuse me, of demigods, and they do. They have quite a few stories. So it fits that narrative that, okay, we're seeing this Grigori tale maybe being played out in Norse mythology as well, creating these half human, half creatures who would then go on and have offspring themselves, right? So it makes an interesting conversation because, okay, where were there high concentrations or stories about semi-divine people? Well, you had them in Germanic culture, you had them in Greek culture, but there's not a lot of that in other cultures. There's not a lot of talk of demigods or semi-divine in, say, a lot of African culture. Like, I don't know of any stories where any of the Orishas, right, Ogun, Oshun, any of them had offspring with humans, right? I did not hear of that. I also, if we go back and we talk Kemetic belief systems, I don't know of any stories of Set or Atum or Akhten or Nephthys having children again with humans, right? So there was not concepts of the semi-divine or, the demigods and so forth, or as I might label them, the Grigori or Nephilim, right? So that didn't happen in those particular. But they did. The stories were prevalent in other cultures. So once you get something that's different, right? Like, who knows how the genetics play out, where it was shaped. So now we're just kind of like the look, right? Like, that's really what we're trying to get to. But we can point to the areas where these guys come from. So I think that's kind of worth investigating. And the reason I brought it up is, we see it in Germanic cultures. We see it in their roots to Gregorian culture. And you do kind of see how these cultures came together. And then at some point, this belief system is kind of integrated with, the Catholic Church, right? The Roman Catholic Church, it comes in and takes over the belief system there as well. So there's a lot of meat on that bone that you're talking about, man. And like I said, I think it will hit the analytics pretty well. I'm not sure how I'm going to title it, but I don't think you're wrong. In a nice way, I don't know if we 100% mean the same things. I think we're close, but I don't think you're wrong, and I don't think what I've said about the out of Africa idea occurring first, and then these outside influences maybe tampering with their gene pool, doing the other things, and this is kind of what manifested. So that was something I wanted to throw out there that I think you're really into something. I'll see if it gets me banned again, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Grigori and my thoughts on exactly what you're saying. Also, interestingly, I think you should look at Yakub theories as well, because it explains what you're saying as well, and it totally makes sense, right? Like the way that he went about, producing a genetic look. So anyway, thank you again for the comments. I always appreciate it, and we'll have some more fun with this topic as well.